right, you're listening to Hawke Talk. I'm here today with Hasard Lee. How are you?
Hey, great. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. So I assume, day one, you're born and you immediately come out of the womb, jump in an airplane, you're out. Like you're a pilot
Easy,
from day one. That was it.
easy.
You're
Yeah,
hooked. And yeah, that's how it works. So you were the youngest pilot in history, right?
easy. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's uh, it's in my blood.
Yeah. Perfect. So let's take me back. Where were you originally born?
So I was born in San Diego,
Yeah.
California. So my dad was a physicist, so he worked for the Department of Energy. So kind of a military lifestyle, moving around the country. Moved Livermore, Los Alamos National Laboratory,
Uh-huh.
where the Manhattan Project was,
Yeah.
DC as well. So moved all over the U.S., even outside the country for a little bit. But
Yep.
yeah, that's kind of my childhood, mostly California and New Mexico.
And did you like the sciences? Were you kind of taking off after your dad as a kid? Were you into that side of things?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's still the smartest guy I know, and I think what makes him smart is his ability to be able to explain complex subjects at the listener's level. So
Yeah.
he was, explaining how airplanes work. He was really into aircraft growing up. His eyesight wasn't good enough, but yeah, he wanted to become a fighter pilot. So he would take me to air shows. That's really how I became a fighter pilot.
Got
He
it.
kind of incepted the idea in
Yeah.
me. Went to an air show, saw the Thunderbirds fly. This was back in the day when you could sit in the cockpit of some of these jets, and so
Mhm.
waited in line all morning. Finally got a chance to get up to the jet. They put a helmet on you, just like the one behind me. Looked like a bobblehead on my 5-year-old
Yeah.
head, and I got a chance to climb up the ladder of an F-16, sit in the cockpit, and was just blown away by how futuristic that thing was. Like
Yeah.
all the buttons and switches. The seat is reclined 30 degrees back to help with the G forces. And so I knew right then I wanted to be a fighter pilot.
Got it. And what are we at 5 years old?
5 years old.
So
Yeah.
I guess news to parents out there, or maybe not news, but a good message is you can actually incept what you want your kids to be. When
You
you're like,
bet.
I want them to grow up and be this, you can actually put some in there.
Well, here's some more proof. My brother is a fighter pilot as well for the Navy.
Yeah.
So
There you
the
go.
lesser service,
Yeah.
I don't hold that against him too much, but yeah, he flies F-18. So the
Nice.
Top Gun jet from the latest video.
Awesome. And so how did that progress? Like, were you from 5 years old, were you just like, you loved him, you watched him? Like, did you go right into pilot training at 15? Like, was this like one track? This is what I'm doing from 5. There was just no question ever.
Pretty much. So like
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot. There's not a lot you can do as a kid. So I just
Yeah.
kind of memorized all the facts, read everything I could, watched all the movies, of course, Top Gun. But
Yeah.
it wasn't until, well, really when I was like 13 years old, had a chance to fly in a Cessna for the first time. So Cessna is like a
Yep.
old aircraft. It's like a flying lawnmower with wings.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
so got a chance to fly that. This is Los Alamos, New Mexico. So it's on the top. It's almost like a James Bond villain airfield because it's on top of a cliff and you take off into the air. It took us like a minute to get up to speed. And I knew that's really, was for me. Like it just clicked. Now, in order to become a fighter pilot, you have to first go to, there's a couple different paths. The path I went to was going to the Air Force Academy. And so
Mhm.
it's this long process, got a congressional nomination, and then got a letter back in the mail my senior
And
year.
as you mentioned, you watched Top Gun. So what made you go Air Force versus Navy? Was that the
I like the planes, the F-16. So the F-16 that I first sat in,
Yep.
that was the plane. So I figured Air Force, they have more jets, maybe
Yep.
more opportunities. I applied to both the Naval Academy and the Air
Okay.
Force Academy. Air Force was slightly in front. I just thought they had cooler aircraft, but I would have gone to either.
And what is that process like? Because I know you, as you said, you need I think it's a congressional recommendation or whatever to
Mhm.
get into either. And what were you, as you knew you were going to need that? Like, what was your high school life like? How did you target that other than just reaching out to a congressman and asking?
Yeah, so it's a whole person concept. So you have to show leadership. So in sports, I kind of knocked both those out by being the captain of the baseball team.
Mhm.
And so I was really passionate about sports, played baseball, ran cross country. Like I said, captain of the baseball team. You have to get decent grades. And so I got a congressional nomination. But like I was saying, I got a letter back my senior year, and it said, unfortunately, you have not been accepted to the Air Force Academy. And so I thought that the dream was over there,
Uh-huh.
but was able to reapply and get this conditional scholarship, saying if I went to this other school called New Mexico Military Institute, It's in Roswell, New Mexico, middle of nowhere. Went there for a year, kept my grades up, met the best teacher of my life, and then from there was able to get into the Air Force Academy. So kind of a circuitous route.
And what caused you to reapply and stick with it like that? Was it like, was there advice there? Or like, hey, you still got a shot? Like, will you get this denial? Like, what caused you to keep going?
It's just kind of in my personality just to be persistent. So,
Yep.
You can keep applying until I think age 23. So my plan was just to keep applying and kind of
Yep.
brute force my way through. I think it was my SATs were a little bit low. So I just kept taking that like 6 times. And so was able to make it in.
Nice. Awesome. And so you spent a year in Roswell. And when you say the best teacher of your life, what was it? Give me more.
Yeah. So Roswell, New Mexico, it's the middle of nowhere and it's a military school. So you show up and it's like going through boot camp. And so I found best teacher, his name's Colonel Ted Hitchcock. And so he was the head of the Air Force Academy's history department and retired there and then went out to the middle of nowhere to teach kids like me. And actually, New Mexico Military Institute was a high school and a junior college.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was great. He just really encouraged the students to think critically. And even though we all wanted to be, pilots, fighter pilots, go to the Air Force Academy, he really taught us that, it's important to have all the academics down as well. And so I still keep up with him. He was a great teacher.
And is it 4 years? I mean, was it 1 year at Roswell and then 3 years in Air Force Academy, or 4 more years in Air Force?
4 more years.
Okay.
So I started over at the Air Force Academy. And again, it's like going through boot camp. So I had a chance to do that twice.
Nice.
Which was a lot of fun. And surprisingly, there's not a lot of flying at the Air Force Academy. It's mostly academic. So it's an accredited university. I think there were about 10,000 people that applied, 1,400 people made it in.
Uh-huh.
And it's really a heavy weeding out process. And so by the end, there was only about 1,000 people there. Uh-huh. And actually, after your sophomore year, you're committed for 5 years to the Air Force. And you still don't know, you haven't been through all the physicals and things like that to determine if you're medically qualified to become a fighter pilot. So it's pretty stressful. Yeah. I walked onto the baseball team there and then switched to being a boxer there. Mm-hmm. And actually, the day before my physical, it's a big deal. I ruptured my eardrum sparring, and so it was kind of a big process to get the waiver to be medically qualified, and then from there was able to get a pilot slot out of the academy.
And so during that period, I mean, is it? I know you don't have the comparison, but would you say it's somewhat normal college in the sense of like, are you taking normal classes and gen eds and doing that kind of stuff, or what are you studying at the Air Force Academy?
No, unfortunately, it's not kind of a normal college experience. Like it's inspections on the weekend. It's very heavily military focused, but also academics. Kind of the 3 pillars are your military side, your academic side, and then your athletic side. And so you're always busy. It's kind of nestled in Colorado Springs. You're not allowed to have a car until your junior year. You also have to, like as a freshman, you kind of get somewhat hazed where you can't wear your backpack. You have to walk around on the certain tiles, those kinds of things. So it's heavily academic and very military. And so especially the first couple of years. Once you're a senior, things ease off a little bit. But it's a college.
Is everyone that goes generally a pilot already, like a licensed private pilot?
No, most people aren't, in fact. Okay. So a lot of people haven't flown at all. Yeah. They show up and, a lot of people actually don't become pilots. So the Air Force has 300,000 people. Only about 20,000 people total are pilots in some capacity. And so most people go on to do other things.
Yeah. And you had your license already, right? Because you started flying in high school, as you were saying.
Well, I started flying a little bit. So at Roswell, I got a chance to get my private pilot's license, kind of the lowest thing. Yep. And so I had a pilot's license. You also get a little bit of glider training, or at least I did at the academy. And so spent a summer flying gliders, but that was the extent of my flying experience. So probably about 100 hours flying.
Okay. That's something. And so, as you said, so is it junior year you start to find out if you're going to be a pilot, or when do you find that out?
Yeah, junior year. Junior year, you find out if you're going to go to pilot training.
Yeah.
It's been a while. So yeah, I think it's junior year, maybe beginning of senior year, you find out if you're going to become a pilot.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I was able to get one of those pilot slots. And then so just you're waiting your senior year for you to graduate. And then after that, go on to pilot training.
And do you get assigned to a plane right then, or does it?
No, absolutely not. So, unfortunately, so, I mean, it's a good thing. So first thing you do is you go to Introductory to Flight training, where you're learning to essentially fly Cessnas. They're Diamond DA-20s.
Uh-huh.
They're those lawnmowers with wings. And
Right.
so about 20% of people wash out because they want to wash you out at the lowest level. It costs
Yeah.
the military the least. And so you do that for a while. About
And
20% of
what
people,
causes someone to wash out at that?
oh, all kinds of things, especially at the first kind of rung. So, a lot of people just don't have the aptitude, or it's different than what they thought it would be like. Cause there's a lot of studying. It's not just,
Yeah.
you know, stick and rudder skills. And so the
Yeah.
Air Force has a specific way of flying. And so, all kinds of different ways that people wash out. And then so after that, it's a 6-week school. Then you go to your pilot training base, and then it's really game on where you're flying T6s. T6
Mhm.
Texan 2 is almost like a P-51 Mustang,
Yeah.
1100 horsepower turboprop jet, and it's a great time. And you're there with 30 other students and some of the top prospects in the country, and you show up. And I remember the first day, the last briefing that we had was something called a pep talk, and one commander walks in. He walks to the front, this grizzled veteran, and he says, "I want you all to close your eyes." Closed my eyes. He said, "How many of you want to fly fighters? Raise your hand." I raised my hand, and he said, "Open your eyes." Everybody had their hand raised. And he said, "If you're lucky, 2 of you will fly fighters. The rest of you will either wash out or fly heavies." So most of the jets aren't fighters. They're
Yeah.
these transport aircraft or tanker aircraft. And
Yeah.
he said, "I want you to think about that while you're here." And after that, walked out. It was game on. I remember thinking, that's a hell of a pep talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Great intro. And so, how confident were you? Like, I mean, we all have, I think, the sort of tendency to be, what is it, the star of our universe, so to speak, the, what do they call it? The main character syndrome.
Yeah,
But
like a big fish in a small pond.
yeah. And so for you, were you always like that, but I'm going to be one of those too? Like, was there just kind of a innate confidence, or were you like, we'll see what happens?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there was confidence. My plan was just to be a maniac in terms of how hard I worked. I
Yeah.
figured that so this 1 year determines everything. So at pilot training, again, about 20% of people wash out. And then from there, you get split off. So those 2 people go and fly fighters. And the way it whittles down is about 30 people are in the class, 7 people go on to fly the T-38. And those are the
Yeah.
people that are eligible to fly fighters. And then from
Gotcha.
there, just a couple people get picked. And so
Yeah.
my plan was just to work as hard as humanly possible, and let the chips fall where they
Yeah.
fall, because there is a lot of luck in it. I
Yeah.
was fortunate. Some people just had bad days during check rides, those
Yep.
kinds of things, or had a lot of weather to deal with, and they didn't do so well. But I think for the most part, people end up racking and stacking where they should. And early on, most of us thought that the really experienced people would be the ones that would get those fighter spots. And there
Yep.
were 2 people that were full on airline pilots before they joined the
Oh,
Air
wow.
Force. And so
Yeah.
they had thousands of hours. We figured those guys were a shoe in. But the thing about Air Force pilot training is it pushes everybody to and past their limit. And so
Yeah.
even if you have experience flying like under instrument conditions,
Yep.
you don't have a lot of experience flying a supersonic jet trainer,
Right.
definitely not in formation or in the
Yep.
weather. It's terrifying where you're flying just 3 feet wingtip clearance from another jet
Yep.
and you can barely see them. So it's, it pushes you. And that's really what pilot training is about, is testing your mental toughness, your ability to be able to handle adversity, to get your feedback from the instructor. They're grading you on about 60 different items,
Mhm.
and to just get beaten up in the debrief essentially, and the next day come back again with all those fixed. And you do that over and over and over again. And so some people, that's not really in their nature. So that's really what they were testing.
And how often are there accidents? I mean, that example, you can't even see the pilot next to you, but you're 3 feet away, tip to tip.
They happen a couple times a year, I'd
Okay.
say. It varies. So there are some low end accidents, maybe taxi accidents, things like that.
Yeah.
People are always making mistakes. I don't
Yeah.
think any pilot's ever flown a perfect sortie. But in terms of like full up crashing, that definitely happens. And
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends that didn't make it. So
Yeah.
it's a aviation's definitely can be a risky thing.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it's been around over 100 years now, but it's still, sort of a pioneer thing. Like, I'm a private pilot, so as you said, the lowest tier of it, but I've got about 150 hours, and it's like you realize, like, as much as this is something like I fly commercial, whatever it is, I think I fly 70 flights a year, and so I'm on an airplane all the time, and you take it for granted. And it's still very much sort of an adventurous, risky thing to do in some senses.
Yeah, and I guess it's not necessarily from a statistics standpoint
No,
extremely risky,
no,
but it definitely the margins, are thin. So if you have a bad day,
yep,
you can pack it in with
yeah,
one or two mistakes, you can kill yourself. And
yep,
most things outside of maybe driving that people do day to day are not like that. So
yep.
it can be extremely risky, especially if you're not proficient.
Yeah, and I always say the thing I've learned the most becoming a pilot was how much more landing is an art than a science. I always thought that it's like just it's automatic. Like once you're a pilot, you probably press a button and it just lands a plane, and then you realize like no, every landing is different. The winds
Yeah.
changed, et cetera, et cetera. The fact, and of course you know this, but like most people don't realize that it's like it is like a lot of the things you think are scary are not at all. The one thing that I was like, oh wow, this is it's, and I try to equate it to like parallel parking, where it's like, yeah, you get it down and you get that muscle memory, but like it's still like you can screw it up a little bit, like, and there's again ways to make up for that, but it's like I was
Mhm.
very surprised how much more that is just touch and feel.
And especially the pressure's on because if you screw up, you can crash the plane, you can kill yourself. I don't
Yep.
know about you, but I can distinctly remember my first solo flight because as
Yeah.
soon as you
Oh
take
yeah.
off, you're so focused. You
Yeah.
go and fly, the instructor hops out. You're
Yeah.
so focused up to that point, and as soon as you lift off, at
Yeah.
least for me, my first thought was, "There's nobody else to land this thing. You're the only
Yeah.
person that can do it." And I think
I would
that's
be
really
surprised if
confidence inspiring.
Yeah, and I would be surprised if not every single person getting their license has that exact thought. Is like because
Mhm.
there's no like, okay, I can't do this right now. Like you take over. You're like sitting up there where you're the entire time you've been training. You could just hand off the yoke and be like, okay. But now you're like, I need to figure this out. And then the first time you do it, the level of confidence that that builds is just immense. Like that feeling of, wait, I did it. I fully
Mhm.
flew a plane by myself and did the most important thing, which is got it back on the ground.
Yeah. People I talk to, there's so many people that are interested in aviation, and I always tell them like, if you can, just try to solo a plane. Like, you only need
Yep.
about 20 hours of flight time.
Yep.
A lot more training, but
Yep.
the confidence that builds because you are taking off on your own. You're the only
Yep.
person that can land this thing, and then to
Yep.
actually do it it
Yep.
is a life and death situation. I mean, it's
Yep.
just there's nothing like it.
Yep, totally agree. And so you go and so you said you got into that group of 7 to go on those what were the planes called that you train on?
T-38s.
T-38s. And so make that next step. Was that a little bit of a relief? Like you're like, all right, I'm in the final kind of group now. Or were you like already
No,
kind of
no, it was the opposite. It was like, all right, I'm in that
game on?
final group, like,
Yeah.
so I've let's see what happens. Like, let's
Yeah.
not screw up. Let's finish this thing. And
Yeah.
so
And
flying
how long
T-38s is extremely tough. What's
yeah.
that?
I would say how long is that process?
So T6s are about 6 months, T-38s are 6 months.
Okay.
T-38 is an extremely tough plane to fly. So it was built actually it was designed in the 50s. And so it has
Okay.
really tiny engines because the engine technology wasn't that good, but they
Yeah.
still wanted to fly supersonic. So the thing
Okay.
is built like a lawn dart. And
Yeah.
so what that means is that high speed handling is pretty good. Low
Yeah.
speed handling is atrocious. And over the
Yeah.
years, God, so many people have killed themselves in a traffic pattern stall. You know what a
Yeah.
traffic pattern stall
Yep.
is. So you don't have enough thrust,
Right.
the aircraft starts to stall. Unlike an F-16 or F-35, which has a ton of
Yeah.
thrust, your left hand can always get you out of trouble.
Yeah.
T-38, doesn't have enough power, and people just auger in the
Yeah.
traffic pattern. So many people have done it. That's why they split it off because back in the day, everybody went through T-38s, but too many people
Got
were
it.
killing themselves. So now
Yeah.
just the people that have a potential shot at a fighter spot
And
go to
curious,
T-38.
why still train on that, not versus like get you into something a little more modern or better? Is there not enough?
Air Force is working on that. So the next iteration of that, it's going to be the T7,
Uh-huh.
and so it's just been a long process.
Yeah.
Air
Got it.
Force really likes to pay for things that go into combat, and so
Yeah.
training always kind of takes a back seat to that.
Got it.
They've been upgraded avionics wise, but they're definitely due for a refresh. So the T7, it's starting to come online and
Right.
should replace them. I mean, there's a lot of T30. It's 500 that they have to replace, so it'll be a process.
Yeah.
But by 2030, they'll probably all be replaced.
Cool. Got it. And so that 6 months, is that full 6 months? Are you like, what are you doing during that 6 months? Are you flying 8 hours a day and that's really the focus, or what are you doing?
So every day is about a 12-hour day. You're
Yeah.
fully focused flying. You fly once, sometimes twice a day, but it's a fire hose. The first day you show up, they give you a stack of books 4 feet tall. Now it's an iPad, but I mean, it's it's a ton of information. So as you know, going through
Yep.
civilian pilot training, there's a lot of rules to
Yep.
remember and a lot of different techniques, and so it's like going to college. You're studying how to execute all the maneuvers, then you'll go and fly it. Air Force, we have kind of a specific way where we'll brief it up for about an hour. We'll go out and fly for about an hour and a half, come back, and we'll spend 2 to 6 hours debriefing that sortie, going through every single thing that went wrong, how to do it slightly better,
Mhm.
and you're fully focused. You're doing simulator training. You also have class academics, so your days are extremely packed. So I really didn't take any time off during pilot training. Every single day, including the weekends, was maybe the weekends a little bit less, but I worked every day through pilot training because I didn't want to look myself in the mirror afterwards and not get a pilot slot and know that I
Yep.
could have done more.
And you, at that point, was all seven going to be pilots? It was just, were you going to be one of the two fighters? Was that kind of?
For the most part,
Yeah.
there every once in a while somebody
Sure.
will wash out
Yeah.
completely, but for the most part, those 7 people, they're at the top of the class.
Yeah.
So they're going to go fly. And back then it was they would go fly like bombers or
Got
other
it.
aircraft that would be in combat. So like
Yeah.
intelligence aircraft as well.
Yep. Got it. And so is it literally at the end of that 6 months you find out who's who? Is that kind of coming too?
Yeah, you have no idea, and
Yeah.
then they have a assignment night where
Yep.
you're standing up. All your friends or family are there, and they'll have you stand up, and they'll roast you a little bit about stupid things that you've done.
Yeah.
And then at the end they'll flip the slide, and then behind you is what aircraft you're flying. And so to the very end, I was nervous.
I was going to say, so you went in there, still no clue.
Yeah, no clue.
So they're not putting a depth rank in throughout it, like going back to the Top Gun movie where they're like ranking people while they're going. Like
They are ranking you as you're going.
Oh,
So,
okay.
but they don't know how many. You don't know anything about the drop that you're going to get. It's purely
Right.
needs of the Air Force. So they might drop
Got it.
in some cases 0 fighters, or in some cases much more. And so it
Yeah.
purely depends on the needs of the Air Force. You have no idea if they're going to get an F-15, F-16, or what. And so
Yeah.
it's pretty nerve wracking.
Yeah. And you got that F-16?
Got the F-16. So
Nice. And it was
yeah. But you're
awesome.
still not done because you
Right.
have to go through another school where
Yeah.
you're taking the T-38. It's called Introductory to Fighter Fundamentals, and flying it like a fighter pilot. Because up to this point, you're not necessarily doing kind of combat maneuvers. You're doing flying in formation, doing instruments,
Mhm.
kind of more basic flying. And so you go to IFF, and that's kind of that last test to really kick you in the teeth to
Yeah.
see, is this person resilient? And about 20% of people were washing out. So imagine you got your fighter spot, you're excited, your family's excited, you have this last school to make it through, and then you washed out. So that's one test. And the second test is the centrifuge. So when we're flying, we're pulling a lot of G forces. Right now we're both at 1 time the force of gravity, but we'll pull up to 9 times the force of gravity in the F-16. So it's this crushing amount of force.
Yep.
And you weigh almost 10 times as much as you weigh now. And
Yep.
so a lot of people have blacked out and killed themselves because
Yep.
all that blood is being pulled from their head into their extremities.
Yep.
And so you'll go to a centrifuge and they'll spin you around. It's this torture chamber,
I've been in
essentially.
one, actually.
You've been in one? So
Yeah.
you know exactly
Yeah.
where'd you go?
The Cosmosphere in Kansas.
Okay.
It's like astronaut training is what it
Yeah,
is.
nice. How many G's did you pull?
5, I believe. So not 9, but
Okay.
we got up to 5.
Yeah, so you know how much it sucks.
Yeah, even
And
at
so-
5, I came out nauseous. Like it was
Exactly.
Yeah.
And well, the thing is, like, so the Air Force ones, I don't know about that one, but I would guess it's a little fancier than the Air Force ones. Air Force, there's 0 thought put into the comfort, air conditioning.
no,
It's
it was
hot
yeah, yep.
tube essentially, and
Yeah.
it spins you around. And even for experienced fighter pilots, not experienced fighter pilots, but people who've been through pilot training, about 10% of people would puke.
Yep.
And so you're just praying that you go before that person that pukes,
Yeah.
as opposed to after, because you're already nauseous.
Yeah.
And I think about 10-20% of people would fail that, and you get
Yeah.
one more chance the next day. If you failed that, then you were washed out, and you
Wow.
still became an Air Force pilot, but you couldn't fly fighters.
Got it. And so do you go to like a C-130 at that point or something more?
Yeah, some other. I think back then it was mostly bombers.
Got it. And how long is that school, the fighter school?
For
IFF.
flying like
Yeah.
the Introductory Fighter Fundamentals. That's about 6 weeks.
Oh, okay. So it's not another 6 months of
No,
sweet.
no. So
Got
it's
it.
just kind of a quick course, see if you have what it takes,
Yeah.
and then you move on to what we call the B course, the basic course for flying your jet. And so in
Uh-huh.
my case, it was the F-16.
Yeah. And how long do you do? I mean, the schooling here, it really is reminding me of medical school. Like you did a 1 year prep school, 4 year college, and then it sounds like 2 years of flight school. And now you're getting into your specific focus.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. It's kind of, and then by the end of it, you're not around any of the people you started with because you're
Yeah.
just constantly getting weeded out. And so for me, went to Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, Arizona.
Mhm.
Got a chance to fly the F-16. I remember walking up the ladder to that same jet, not the same exact one, but same type of jet that
Yeah.
so many years earlier I'd climbed as a kid, and
Yeah. How
just
old were
finally
you
got a chance to
when you
fly it.
finally got to sit in it again?
This it was let's see, about 25.
Yeah. So
It
we're
was about
literally
25.
20 years later.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
20 years later. Yeah.
Um, and so and had you trained in simulators for F-16 at that point, or like did they?
Definitely. So the entire basic training for F-16 flying is 8 months to a year, and then 2 months of that is academics and simulators. So they're
Got it.
teaching you all the ins and outs of how their aircraft operates. You're also doing simulators. We rely heavily on simulators.
Yeah.
In fact, in the F-35, it's only single seat. So the first time you take off, you're on your own. And
Yeah.
so yeah, we do about 2 months of simulators, and then you start flying. The first thing you do is learn how to basically just fly it like instrument flying conditions, because that
Uh-huh.
still kills the most people, being spatial disoriented
Yeah.
and weather and things like that. And then you learn how to dogfight, what we call BFM, basic fighter maneuvers. And then you do medium range air to air, long range air to air. Then you do all the air to ground stuff, and then you get shipped off to your first combat Air Force base.
Got it. And so I'm curious with the, training for dogfighting and anything, is it common these days still? I just don't hear about it to have air to air combat going in like these
It's
conflicts.
not that common, actually.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, they see Top Gun, they think it's
Yeah,
all.
exactly.
Although the newest Top Gun did a decent job of showing, there's a lot of. It's mostly air to ground in terms of the
Yeah.
mission set, but we still have to be good at air to air. I would say dogfighting is about 10% of what we
Yeah.
focus on,
Okay.
because we're focusing heavily on medium and long range air to air. If you got
Yeah.
to dogfighting, you did something wrong. That being said, you still need to be able to do it if you
Right.
get yourself into that situation.
Yeah, makes sense. And so where did they send you from there? You said you go to your combat base.
From there, I went to Korea, so
Okay.
Gunsan Air Base in South Korea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how, it seems like that's, thankfully a standstill, not, or was it a conflict when you ended up there? What was going on?
So this was back in 2014. So there's actually quite a bit of tensions. North Korea just detonated a nuclear weapon,
Mm-hmm.
and they had also shelled some people in South Korea, one of their islands. And so there's a lot of tension. We were always training to take the fight north if we had to,
Yeah.
doing a lot of different exercises there. Nothing ended up happening there, but we did get to train a lot. One of the things going through all this training, you think you finally made it, but when you first show up to your pilot training base, you realize that the most important job that you can have is just to make sure the snack bar is stocked.
Yeah.
You are the lowest rung. You
Yeah.
essentially can't do anything. You have to wait 2 months through additional training until you can become a wingman, and even then, you're just tied to your flight lead's hip basically when you
Yeah.
fly. You're not making a lot of difficult decisions. So you start off as that wingman, then you become a flight lead where you lead 2 to 4 other aircraft,
Yeah.
and then you become an instructor pilot where you're trained. So that's kind of the three rungs for a fighter
And
pilot.
wingman, are you actually like second seat in a plane, or are you flying another plane? But
No, you're flying another plane.
Yeah, got it.
So
Okay.
typical formation is a 2-ship, 2 aircraft going out, or a 4-ship, 4 aircraft going out, and you're there basically to back up your flight lead.
Got it. And I'm guessing the first 2 months, as you said, like you've got to get a lay of the land, like just knowing I learned to fly in LA, which thankfully is a busy airspace. So I like got a little bit more than like a lot of places you learn, but still, if I ended up landing in Colorado Springs or in New Mexico, you're going to want to different when you're going to combat versus private pilot, but still you want to get a lay of the land, figure out where you are, what the airspace is like, all those kind of things. And you're dealing with a potential combat. You want to know what North Korea looks like before it's like, all right, go get them.
Yeah, well, we really only get one flight called a LAO, local area orientation ride, to really get a chance to have the lay of the land from like an instrument perspective. After that, you're focused on, so each combat Air Force base really specializes in different things. And so for us flying F-16 Block 40s, we were training to go into North Korea, to drop weapons there, to engage their fighters, and to come back. Whereas at other bases like Shaw Air Force Base, which is where I went afterwards, we're focused on what's called suppression of enemy air defense. So you're spending those 2 months doing those specific top off rides so that you can actually be useful when you go into combat to your squadron.
Yep. Got it. And so how long were you in South Korea?
I was there for about 2 years.
And was it really just like flying training missions and that kind of thing for 2 years, just being prepared? But
yeah, just being prepared. We would go along the border and train with the U.S. forces, the South Korean forces. There, we're doing a lot of exercises, especially in nuclear, biological, chemical environments, which takes a lot of training.
yeah,
And so, yeah, just preparing. And as a young flight lead, you're really trying to progress and learn so that you go through a school called the Flight Lead Upgrade Program. And so you're really spending your time preparing for that so that you can become a flight lead.
got it. And was it, I guess at what point were you like, I fulfilled my childhood dream? Was it sitting in the F-16? Like at what point was there a point where you're like, whoa, I did it?
That first flight, that first flight back at Luke, when I took off, I thought, I at least soloed an F-16. And so whatever happened after this, I had at least fulfilled that dream.
Yeah.
Now, you want to be a professional and you want to do well and make it as far as you can go. But in terms of fulfilling that first dream, it was just going max afterburner down the runway in a slick, clean F-16 and just feeling the acceleration and then pulling up in the air. I remember, thinking I had made it.
That's awesome. And then again, your eyes were set on flight lead. And how long did it take you to get there?
About 2.5 years.
Okay.
So about 2.5 years. So I had moved bases from South Korea to Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina.
Okay.
We were doing an extremely important mission set, which is called SEED. So have you seen the latest Top Gun?
Yeah.
So, when they're flying, to the enemy, along the canyon wall and those surface to air missile sites are trying to shoot. Well, typically there's not a convenient canyon to fly down. And so you have to take out those missile sites. And so we were one of only 6 Air Force squadrons focused on that suppression of enemy air defense mission. And so we were extremely busy. I mean, I think there's more to that mission than all the other missions combined in terms of learning different aspects, because you're learning about all the frequencies and how to jam them and how to destroy them. And so went to Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, and then about 6 months in, went into the FLUG, the Flight Lead Upgrade Program. Mm-hmm. And that's, a tough program. I think it lasts about 6 weeks, depending on how fast you progress. And then after that, now you're in charge of 2 to 4 other aircraft when you fly.
Yeah. And I don't know how much you're allowed to share with that, but like, were you actually in combat somewhere where we were in conflict, taking out anti-air?
Yeah. So after we first did a lot of training, one of 6 squadrons in the world doing SEED. So we went to like 10 red flag level exercises. So where everybody shows up to a base like Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, Nevada, 100 aircraft flying at once. So after about a year of doing that, I became an instructor pilot. Uh-huh. And then about 6 months later, we deployed to Afghanistan.
Got it.
And so it was a definitely a unique experience, because at first we were pretty disappointed because this was 2016 and it was the height of the drawdown. A lot of stuff was happening in Syria. And as a fighter pilot, you want to get in the mix of things. You don't hope for conflict, but if you have this special skill set, and so if there is a conflict that kicks off, you want to be in the mix of it.
Yeah.
And so we were a little disappointed. The U.S. only sent 1 fighter squadron. That's across all services, the Marines, Navy, all countries, just 12 F-16s. And so we thought, we'd just be burning holes in the sky.
Yeah.
First couple months, that's pretty much what happened. We were looking at the feed, seeing all the stuff happening in Syria. Yeah. But then ISIS started taking over in Afghanistan, and they were growing exponentially. Secretary of Defense Mattis took over. He said he wanted all ISIS annihilated because they were destabilizing the region. And so after that, kicked into overdrive. We were doing 24-hour operations, only 12 F-16s. And so 2 F-16s would be airborne at any given time. And we were extremely busy going from essentially firefight to firefight, trying to help out the troops on the ground.
And I mean, and I actually don't know this, was ISIS that sophisticated that they had, like, again, I'm taking the Top Gun reference, like they had these mounted on the mountain, like anti-air missile, automated anti-aircraft missiles is what I remember from that movie. It's been a couple years, but like, was that what you're doing with, or were you doing with like literally a guy with an RPG?
Yeah, I mean, there's a spectrum of threats, but it was a low intensity conflict in terms of there was not a big surface to air
Yeah,
missile threat. So, what our primary job was to help the troops out on the
yeah,
ground because those guys were getting shelled, and
yeah,
ISIS did have some pretty complex attacks that they were doing. Same thing with our base. Like we sustained several attacks, including one where there was a suicide bomber that was able to sneak his way onto the base and detonate himself on the day after Veterans Day and end up killing several people.
got it.
And so yeah, our job, as a fighter pilot flying in a low intensity conflict, your job is primarily to help out the troops on the ground, and you're relatively comfortable. You're flying at 15,000 feet in your jet, but the thing about a single engine jet is, if that engine fails,
Yeah,
you're always 5 minutes away from having to punch out.
yeah,
And if you punch out, you're going to be in a lonely place because usually we don't have the gas to stay on station for long periods of time. And so now
yeah.
you're running around with just a handgun trying to outrun the ISIS or Taliban fighters that are coming after you.
Is that I don't want to say common, but is your squad of 16, was that something that, or was it 16 people or 16 jets? I guess that's the first
There's
question.
12 jets.
Oh,
And
sorry,
so we
12.
cycled different people through,
Got it.
but I forget the exact number, but a
Yeah.
little bit more than that.
Did you guys have to deal with that sometimes? Did were any jets go down because of engine failure?
Fortunately, our deployment there, we didn't have any jets go down. We did have some jets come close in terms of having failures on the jet,
Mhm.
and so fortunately, nobody had to punch out. Just doing the rough math, there's about a 1 in 5 chance that one of us would suffer a catastrophic accident resulting in the destruction of our aircraft. So about a 1 in 5 chance that one of the aircraft would go down. Fortunately, nobody did. So it was a good deployment.
That's great. And was that your only deployment, or how, like, you went through that in 2016?
That was the
How long
only
were you there?
combat deployment.
Yeah.
So went
How,
to multiple other
yeah.
exercises, but that was the only one where
It's a
there
good
was
thing. We didn't
combat.
have a lot of conflict between 2016 and 2020. So it's, it's a nice time.
There actually was different areas. So
Yeah,
more limited scope, but there's definitely operations going on.
sure.
There's always operations going on.
Yeah, that's fair. And how long did you stick with it? How long were you in the Air Force for?
Well, so I stuck in active duty till 2020. So
Okay.
2020 is when I got out of active duty and joined the reserves. So this is
Yeah.
something that I didn't really know until I was active duty. Is that the Air Force has a big reserve contingent, also guard contingent, where
Yeah.
you can fly part time or they have full time positions as well. And it's a completely different experience. Going through pilot training because those
Yeah.
students know exactly what they're going to fly
Yeah.
as long as they graduate in the top 50% of their class.
Got it.
But also, you stay in one base the rest of your career. So 2020, I got out and joined the reserves
Yeah.
so that I could stay in one location as well as to fly part time. You're flying part time to so the Air Force can retain that talent that they invested
Yeah.
so much into, and then also you can be quickly spun up and go to war. So it's a
Mhm.
reserve component for the Air Force.
Yeah. Love it. And what was the reasoning for doing that? Did you have other things you wanted to do? Like, what drove you in 2020 to want to
Yeah,
move
a
in?
couple different things. So one, I got tired of moving, so I moved 5 times in 7 years, and so I wanted to stay in one location. And then two, I wanted to do different things. So coming back from Afghanistan, a lot of intense missions, a lot of things happened there. So I started writing down some ideas and writing down some of the stories, and figured I think tying this into some of the fighter pilot decision making that we do and the briefing and the debriefing, this might be able to help out other people. And so
Uh-huh.
it's tough to do that when you're full time. And so that's actually one of my theories, was that all these professions have different institutionalized knowledge, and most of them are siloed, not because, especially in the military, not because it's classified, just because we're busy doing the mission. And so I wanted to get out, share that some of those things with other people. And so I wanted to write a book. And so got out of active duty in 2020 and was able to spend the next few years writing a book. And then that came out last year. It's called The Art of Clear Thinking.
Yep.
And it went on to become a Wall Street Journal bestseller and
Nice.
been translated into about a dozen languages. And so it was fun being able to apply some of the skills that I learned as a fighter pilot to writing, which is,
Yep.
extremely
A little
different.
different. Yeah.
And then to be able to to codify some of those lessons and share them with other people and have them reach out saying that it's helped them in their careers.
Yep. Awesome. And so, a couple more questions for you. Number one, what's next? What's on the docket for you?
Right now I am doing a lot of speaking, so going to different organizations, sharing some of those lessons learned in the book. I had a chance to work with Meta, Facebook, their virtual reality headquarters. They use the book for different leadership training seminars.
Nice.
Work with Northrop Grumman, a lot of different companies. But I would say right now my passion is on aviation autonomy. So I think that's going to be a huge revolution. And so working on some different aspects of aviation autonomy that can't really go into quite yet, but I think that's really the next big thing. In terms of fighter pilots, a lot of people ask, when is AI going to replace fighter pilots? The answer is fully, it's going to be a long, long time, because there are certain mission sets that are extremely difficult for AI to be able to help with. That being said, there are small areas that we can carve out and give that to AI, the standard kind of dirty, dangerous jobs.
Yeah, I think it's the augmentation thing like anything else. There's going to be pieces you can offload, but
Mm-hmm.
human replacement isn't coming anytime soon.
Yeah.
And last question, I mean, you went through, I'm still trying to do the math. So like all of, your childhood, a year of prep school, 4 years of Air Force Academy, and then it sounds like 2 years of post Air Force Academy before you knew you would be flying an F-16, right? Is that right?
Yeah, it sounds about right.
So I always like to ask, like, what is something you either did hear or wish you heard that caused you to like really go for it and stick with it? Like, why was that? Was it just that was your dream and you're just going to go for it? Like, what is it? What is something that, again, you wish you heard or you did hear that really helped you get through all that?
What's something I would say? So I grew up skiing a lot. So my dad was a big skier. And so I would ski. Sometimes I would go off on my own when I was like 8 years old and ski. And I would come back and I would say that, I didn't crash at all. And, my dad used to always say, if you're not crashing, you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
So always pushing yourself to failure. And so
Yeah,
that's
we could
something
probably
that
not do that in a jet, but I get the metaphor.
well, you push yourself to failure in the jet. You
Yeah.
don't, there's different levels of failure. So you
Right.
don't want to crash the
Yeah.
jet. So,
Yeah.
that's, you can think of it as different
Yeah.
concentric circles or something. But yeah, you always want to push yourself till you're making mistakes.
Yep.
And so I think kind of in every aspect of my life, whether it's running, whether it's working out, pushing myself to write this book, I always want to push myself to starting to make some mistakes. And if you're not
Yep.
making those mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. And I think that's really the one thing that stood out in pilot training. And having had a chance to be an instructor teaching other students, you can tell the students that are used to failing in a good way and going back and learning and trying to get better. And I think that's the one skill, because as we talked to in the beginning, you're not just born as a good pilot.
Yep.
It's fully based on practice and failing and trying to get better. So I would say if it came down to one statement, it'd probably be that.
Love it. Well, Hazard, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on Hawke Talk.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Of course.